Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the managing director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. As the title of this video suggests, we're discussing, quote, the way things are done here in Thailand. And I made a video about a week ago where I asked our audience for what they wanted me to talk about. And as I said at the time, and not sound like a broken record, but basically, we've come out of Thailand being locked down and all the travel restrictions. I had a lot to talk about when that was going on. And on a specific issue, and it was kind of urgent. Well, that's come and gone. We put that in our rear view mirror, and frankly, I'm kind of tired of talking about it too. So basically, I put it out there to the viewers of this channel, what would you like me to talk about? And I've gotten a lot of good feedback, and this comment was one of them. Quoting directly, I would be interested in learning more about the way things are done. I don't have a good understanding of the process here, specifically how announcements on new laws or policy changes are frequently made to the media and to the public only to be changed or reversed a few days or weeks later. Apparently, they still don't all sit down together to vote and finalize things before announcing decisions, ? This strikes me as strange considering the culture of faith that is prevalent. Well, the problem you've got is an issue that I've brought up a lot, which is the media reports things in such a way that, in my opinion, I'm not going to go out on a limb and say they're intentionally misleading. They're not. But, clickbait is a real thing. And then on top of that, I often think the journalists or whatever that are in the media don't even really understand what they're talking about. Perfect example of this, and maybe this is what this person is talking about, is the notion of foreign land ownership. If going back about 6 weeks ago, this was all over the news. Oh, foreigners are going to be allowed to own land in Thailand. It's a done deal. There were articles out there in the press. I'm not going to point anybody out, but there were multiple ones on major platforms that said, yes, foreigners will be able to do this. No, that was never the case. The fact was it was still being debated. It was a bill that was proceeding through the lawmaking channels, through Parliament, the Cabinet, etc., where they were discussing it. And yes, the cabinet at one point sort of agreed in principle it was something they wanted to discuss further and it might be a good idea, but they never said it was the law, and they never made it the law. If you want sort of the basic, what exactly is a law in Thailand? Well, if it's been published in the Royal Gazette, you can, I look at that as being sort of the equivalent to what we call the Federal Register in the United States, which that's sort of the publication of record with regard to things like announcements from the government and laws. So that's really sort of your touchstone for what is actually on the books. Now, meanwhile, even that, it might not necessarily be a law. It might be an announcement regarding policy. It might be an announcement regarding guidelines. It might be an announcement regarding regulations. So in point of fact, depending on circumstances, it might have the force and effect of law, but it might not be a law per se. Or it might not have the force and effect of law. It's just something that's sort of out there as a guideline. Again, this is going to vary depending on the subject matter at hand. But long story short, one of the reasons I think you see this kind of push and pull, or this pullback, if you will, it's because the media oftentimes jumps the gun with respect to what has actually happened. And they'll have headlines that say, foreigners can own land in Thailand. Well, no, that's not actually what's happened in that particular case. It was a proposal, it was still being discussed, and it was ultimately decided that was not going to be promulgated. So again, where exactly to go to for where the confusion is, I think a big place where a lot of the confusion emanates, it starts with the media. Now, meanwhile, you're going to have to bear in mind that the process of making laws is oftentimes opaque. Perfect example is the United States, where, it's not like, the cartoons where I'm a bill on Capitol Hill and I go through the lower house and the upper house and the president signs me and I become a law. Well, no, not necessarily. The House will they'll pass a bill, the Senate will pass a bill, then they'll have to reconcile the two bills, then it'll go into a conference committee. What comes out of the conference committee could be wildly different than what went into the conference committee. A perfect example of that, I believe, was called the Safe Port Act, which had to do with porting. and then it got into conference committee, and it ended up being a bunch of laws about, they ended up tacking on a bunch of laws about online poker. Perfect example of like, it went in as one thing and it came out of conference committee as a totally different thing. So again, the American system, for example, can be very opaque and very confusing if you don't know what you're dealing with. Long story short, big touchstone is always going to be the Royal Gazette. And the other thing to bear in mind is, yeah, the process can be a little bit confusing if you're not intimately aware. And I'm not claiming I'm intimately aware of how due process works with respect to proposals becoming promulgated into law here in Thailand, because from time to time things will, I'll notice that there'll be kind of proposals on something, and then the next thing you know, a full-on law is being published. And exactly what happened between point A and C is sometimes hard to decipher until you look in retrospect and say, okay, this chamber dealt with this, and they discussed this in the cabinet, and then the next thing you know, it became a law. And sometimes the media, for example, just isn't covering it, and then it just kind of pops up out of nowhere. So again, one big place when it comes to sort of the perpetuation of some of the fog on this, or some of the confusion, if you will, I think you can lay that to rest at certain aspects of the media here. The other thing is, again, there's always going to be a language barrier between Thai, for example, and English. That is there. That's a real thing. And it's always going to be present, I think, especially for folks who are new to Thailand, don't speak a lot of Thai, don't understand what's going on that side of the curtain, if you will. And then, again, another thing to bear in mind is, yeah, the system is not always the most transparent, and that's not to say there's anything necessarily wrong with that. As I said, in the lawmaking that goes on in the United States, I remember when the Trump tax bill became law, going through the raw law was just insane because, well, not insane, but it was very difficult because it was so disjointed because of the way the lawmaking process works. Sometimes it's just like making sausage. They just kind of cram it in there, and whatever comes out on the other side just is what it is. So yeah, I totally understand the confusion. I'm not sure that maybe this video has been the most helpful to dispel all of it, but maybe it kind of provides a little more clarity with respect to known unknowns and unknown unknowns with respect to, how lawmaking and policy becomes law here in the Kingdom of Thailand.